So, hello, friends. I'm Anshuman Tiwari, and this is my podcast and YouTube channel by the name Manage Better. As many of you know, I believe that irrespective of where we land in life, we can get better by managing with what we have. We have no control on where we land, but we can definitely control where we can go. And that's the theme, that's the central theme of Manage Better. And in this series of podcasts and video episodes that I bring to you, I speak to speakers and authors and people who are, proficient in the art of transformation and have a connect with Manage Better and try and bring their work and thoughts in a summarized half an hour kind of a session. So, of course, for past episodes and sessions, you can always subscribe to my podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And if you are the video kind, then please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. You can always search by the name Manage Better, and you should get to where I am on these channels and resources. So, with that, let me bring to you today's guest. And I have the great pleasure of bringing a person of high repute from a transformation field, Nigel Adams. Nigel and I worked with ANZ quite a few years ago. So whatever I say about him, I know firsthand, right? So originally from Leeds in the UK, and but he spent about 25 years living in Melbourne, Australia, that is, and with his wife, two children, and very fondly with a German Shepherd at home. He's passionate and innovative, a senior executive, and specializes in service operations management, which and is known for driving performance and rapid transformational change, which some of it I have seen firsthand at ANZ when he was leading payments there. And while leading large award-winning teams in complex delivery networks distributed across many countries and locations. So that's like the bio of a very, very proficient and transformation professionals. Nigel's career path started in management consulting, where he worked across a wide range of functions, industries, from sales to finance, and from public sector to automotive as well. So quite a ride before he got into banking and payments. And I will let him speak a little bit more about this when we get to him. And he subsequently transitioned to financial services, which is where we met, and spent his a lot of time basically trying to demystify the black box, what he calls of payments. Those of you who worked in banking will totally agree that payments still today remains a black box. He's known for challenging received wisdom and for being an industry thought leader in operational excellence. Nigel now spends his time consulting, training, coaching, and blogging, and I'm delighted to have him on the podcast today. So welcome, Nigel, and some opening comments, if you may.
Hi, Anshuman. Thank you very much. It's a topic very, very dear to my heart. Managing better is something we can all do. We can all take responsibility for. It doesn't matter how big, how small a team, whether we're working as an individual contributor or leading a large function. We can all focus and engage our teams and our people and our efforts towards managing better every day. And as you rightly pointed out in my little bio in the introduction, I've been, whether it's lucky, charmed, blessed, to work in many different industries, many different functions, everything from running pubs and cosmetic surgery centers to consulting. I think the only function I've not worked in is technology. But then I spent a lot of my time in consulting, building multi-dimensional databases and sort of working pretty closely with technology. So a very, very diverse and varied career, and I've loved every minute of it so far.
Sure. Thanks, Nigel. And love the part that, you bring a multidisciplinary kind of approach to transformation. So I've always believed that if you play only one game, you are never match fit. And we'll get to your, match fit terminology that you use in a bit. But let's get rolling on the few questions that I have for you. And, through that, we will weave in, what you have to say on the topic. So from what I have known you and seen your profile, you are a unique blend of payments, domain expertise, operations, service operations specifically, and transformation. And what, in your view, how are these connected, and how do we get better in these circumstances? Any wartime stories or anything that you want to start off with, which connects these three interesting topics?
It's an interesting one because I've always been very envious of people who've had a very clear career goal. When I started with Anderson Consulting, as it was at the time, or Accenture now, I was working with a colleague who was a farmer. And he always knew that he wanted to run a cattle station in Australia. We were back in the UK. He knew he was going to be married. He knew he was going to have children. And he virtually calculated how many cattle he was going to bequeath to his children. And he just had such clear focus on what he wanted to do and what he wanted to be. I've never been like that. I've just been sort of curious and inquisitive. I've connected with people and been very fortunate that when they've spoken about their careers and their interests, if it's something that I think, that sounds good, that sounds interesting, there's something I can do to add value, I've embraced the opportunity and I've suggested that. So for me, the way they're connected is, it's quite intrinsic. I always start from very, very sort of grounding principles, and that is, what are we trying to achieve? How do we make this a better business? How do we make this a better service? Or how do we, how can we get the kids to school even better than we do today with the traffic conditions? So you focus with the underlying problem, and then start to think from multiple perspectives. If you're in a business, you think from the sales perspective, from the HR perspective, the finance perspective, and you look at all the questions that they may raise, and that's how you start to bring this together. And when you think about that very, very simple analogy of where I am today is not where I want to be, very simple, how do I get there? How can I sort of, whether you're following sort of the Chinese proverb of just sort of the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or you take that sort of analogy of envisage the peak of Everest, and if you want to climb Everest, what's the base camp you need to, or the camp you need to get to before you get to the peak? What's the camp you need to get to before that one? And you keep walking yourself back till you get to base camp. And so just breaking things down into chunks, small little pieces. What can I do tomorrow that will get me one step closer to my goal, having a broad perspective on what that goal needs to look like. So it's a bit, and that's why a transformation for me, people tend to think of large scale change. The Americans didn't get to the moon in one large scale change. There were lots and lots of experiments, lots of smaller changes that they did first, which cumulatively added together to a significant delivery of an outcome, of an expectation or a challenge and task that was set to them. And I think that's it. So that's why it's important to break these smaller steps down. And that's why I love the idea of having run and change teams working together. So the run teams can focus on the smaller changes, focus on just getting better every day, capability building, enabling sort of large change, where the change team may focus on some of the more significant investment steps that need to be put together. But you join the two up and you get a significant sustainable step forward as opposed to disappointment.
That's fantastic, Nigel, because you brought in very diverse analogies of Mount Everest and and any kind of transformation which one needs to embrace or get onto. It is ultimately step by step, including the one getting to the moon. And in a very simple way, anybody who's been a little bit of a runner, I was for a while before everybody was forced home. And when I started off, I thought that I can't do a marathon ever, so it is impossible. I can't do this ever. If I can barely do a mile, I'll be happy. And when I did the first one, I was like, never again. But 5 minutes later, I was like, when is the next one? So I totally relate to this from another analogy of, distance running or of the other kind, where ultimately 42 kilometers or 26 miles is 1 mile at a time. And that's what transformation does. So, and I'm glad you brought in run the bank and change the bank as well. And I was very keen to ask you about this, that, uh, running the bank and changing the bank, and this is very specific to banking setups, but it happens in every organization, right? It's just a phrase that clicks with banking: run the bank, change the bank. But it could be, run the grocery store and change the
Run the
grocery
factory,
store.
change the factory. Yeah.
Yeah, so everything, it can stick to everything. So it appeals to everybody. But where I wanted your inputs, or your wisdom, was that when you implement change in these circumstances, right, large scale transformational changes, what are the, in your long career, what are the three, four, or whatever number you can, some key principles, some key lessons learned for our listeners, or people who will watch this on YouTube? What would you distill everything as?
Yeah. So in the organization where we work together, Anshuman, there was a chief operating officer there, and I remember distinctly, relatively early into my career at ANZ, about 3 years in, there was another leader, another senior executive, also called Nigel Dobson, and we were asked to go in to see the chief operating officer, and the chief operating officer said, "You two guys are accountable for delivering the transformation, the payments transformation." And at that time, I was running the day-to-day payment operations for the bank. And my colleague had all the investment, all the project money, all the project resources, was working closely with technology to do the technology change. And I came out of that meeting feeling somewhat deflated, because I'd been told I was accountable, but as far as I was concerned, the other guy had all the money and all the resources, and he was going to get all the kudos. And I then started to say, well, why would the chief operating officer make me jointly accountable as well as the other guy? And that's how I really sort of came to this idea that run and change actually need to coexist. What my job was to do, because the change was a big change, it was, multi-year programs, very, very large investment spend. There were things we still needed to do to keep the business alive and to keep the business running and keep our customers happy and satisfied, and our team sort of, interested in the business. So I had to find ways to use our resources to deliver those small changes, which incrementally delivered benefit to the customer, to the shareholder, to our people, at the same time making it easier for the large-scale change team to deploy their change. So a typical sort of improvement program might start with consolidate, standardize, simplify, re-engineer, automate, in that sequence. So I was really helping to drive those first 3 or 4 stages, because those stages didn't require lots of technology change. I also needed to make sure, as our resources were being freed up from the changes we're putting in place, that I gave them an opportunity to work on the transformation so they could upskill. So the next real lesson about when you're doing this type of changes, A, that day-to-day continuous improvement is still part of the transformation. B, your resources, whether they're from the run side or from the change side, need to work together. You need to bring the change people and walk on the floor, or when we can walk on the floor, or virtually walk on the floor to understand how the run works. And you need the run guys to go and work in the sort of the squads, the agile squads, or however it is you're organizing your change. The two teams need to connect very closely, both at a practical level and a human level. And the third point is, you have to measure it. You have to use facts and data. You have to set yourself ambitious targets. One of the challenges of working in many large organizations is there is an incrementalism about targets, because they are public organizations and they have to forecast or predict their sort of future returns to their investors. They tend to be relatively incremental. But if you set someone an incremental target, let's say you set them a 3% improvement, and they come in at 3.1%, then fantastic job. I like to set people, deliver me 15, 20%, and if you come in at 12 or 14%, I'll reward you like there's no tomorrow. You may have failed on your target, but we're still 10% ahead of an incremental one. And that's a very different mindset. And as a leader, you need to create that environment that allows your people to thrive and succeed and strive for significant step change. But when they don't quite hit the targets, they don't get crushed by the rest of the organization. So you protect them in that sense. So we ran sort of, two sets of targets, the set of targets we'd committed to the organization and the set of targets that they had a commitment to me. And it was a very personal contract I had with them. And it's funny, when I left the bank about 9 months later, I got a little message from actually one of the guys in the Bengaluru team who worked in our reconciliations business. And he said, when we set our targets for this year, you set me a straight through processing challenge, which I thought was absolutely impossible. I just want to let you know that with 1 month to go to the end of the financial year, we've met that target. And, I was just absolutely delighted because it was the power of people unleashing the creativity, and they were just doing the small changes, but they were connected into the bigger program. And the two together was what delivered the transformation.
No, that's fantastic, and I love how you brought in, real life examples, because sometimes transformation tends to be a very, academic subject, and people can talk about it, but nobody can do it. And then, it's great to see that, it actually happens, and, you may not get to where you actually aimed, but you are still much further ahead than what you thought.
That's exactly what we found. And I was very fortunate that my colleague, the other Nigel, was extraordinarily supportive. We worked together. There were times when my budgets were really pinched, and he would support with, helping fund some of our resources. We worked really closely together, and we moved the organization significantly further forward in this domain. So that's about the connection. That's about working together, jointly accountable, clear goals, clear expectations, and helping your people believe in themselves.
So I think the tip number one for our listeners is that if you want to be in transformation, get a Nigel in, so chances of success are higher. But moving on to the next one, I know you did say that, and I remember you saying that, you are not a technology guy, and you've never pretended to be one. But transformation these days is pretty much about, implementing or applying technology to operations. And I felt that among the people I've seen or worked with, you were a fantastic bridge between operations and technology, which is what is needed, right? Somebody to apply. Any wartime stories or anything, any anecdote that could bring this concept to life, the bridge between operations and technology, to make it work?
Yeah, I think so. In some ways, when we were talking about this earlier about what the question of is there too much technology or not enough technology, my point is just clearly in today's world, technology is fundamental to the success of pretty much any organization. There's very few organizations now that don't need what we classify as technology. But don't rush into it. Don't let the technology necessarily drive your business. Start with your customer. What is it your customer values? Go right back to your lean principles. Understand the value flow, the customer journey, the process flow, what's critical to quality. And then once you've actually understood that, then go through your consolidate, standardize, simplify, re-engineer. Get your processes as effective as possible before you then start to bring the big technology in, because it makes that technology transformation far easier. And one of the things that we've been pretty good at is we started using robotics very early on in the piece, probably about 2014, and we went too quickly with the technology. So we had fragmented processes. We were trying to apply them to processes which were too big, too complex. And all we did was actually made the environment far more complex than it needed to be. If we'd have done the foundations right first time and then brought in the technology, we'd probably been a little bit better off. So that would be one lesson, is just make sure that you you get the basics right before you jump to technology. But certainly from this ops change technology perspective, the roles are blurring. Your people do need to be tech savvy. Find space, find time, give them opportunities. When COVID hit a couple of months ago, a couple of my clients wanted to postpone their work, so I had some spare time. I did a data science course and taught myself how to program in Python. And there's so much out there. It's so readily available, and it's not expensive. This course, there's 500 hours worth of material, and it cost me $20. And literally, I could do some pretty substantial data analytics, regression analysis, neural network development work, albeit handheld, by the end of that. And it's about wanting to be involved in technology, wanting to understand how technology works and how you can bring it to bear with the customer in mind first.
No, I think I didn't expect you to get into data science. You are giving a run for for all of us, the younger ones. But I think to anybody listening to this, listeners and on the YouTube channel, there is no end to learning. And like Nigel said, he always famously, introduces himself as, not much of a technology guy, but when the time came, he has jumped into it himself. There is no excuse for any one of us to not learn more about technology these days. It is everywhere. It is all kinds. And you don't really have to, land a mine on Mars, as I say. Just enough technology to understand what is the bridge between technology and operations is more than okay. And I'm glad that you brought in robotics as well, Nigel, because this is a question I am often asked, and that what is the right time? And I always say that it is right time only after you've done the initial study. Whenever you want to start, please make some time to do the study. I don't mind if you crunch that time, but don't jump into it, because you will just,
everybody else is.
You might robotize or automate a process which is not required. Yeah. The process itself is not required, and you ended up automating it for perpetuity for the next 5 years. You could have got rid of that process next year, but now it is with you for 5 years. It just sounds cool, but it's not.
That's the complexity further down the track.
Yeah, and you've seen much of this, a lot of this, that once you automate a process, your subject matter expertise on that process actually goes down, because much of the stuff is actually coded. So if it breaks down,
we're in trouble.
And particularly in a bank, right? So there are baby steps to be taken. So just keeping in time in mind, moving to the next topic. Your book is interestingly called Match Fit for Transformation. So I thought maybe I'll take this opportunity for you to give a 2-minute summary for our listeners, and then if anybody's interested, they could get a little deeper into the book themselves.
Yeah, so it's Match Fit is quite an Australian term. It's about what sporting teams do pre-season to get ready to play. And obviously, as they sort of work their way through the season, as they get towards the finals, then they're constantly building their match fitness, not just their fitness in the gym. And that's what I thought about when anybody that's taking over a team that's about to go through a transformation, that's what the book's there to, is there to help them say, how do you set the context so people understand why they're doing the change? How to make sure you are managing your people and leading your people as well as possible through something that's quite complex. Making sure they understand what good looks like. What are the metrics? What are the performance measures that you need to really focus on? Quality, because nothing bad happens when you focus on quality, and how to manage capacity. Once you get those things under your belt, and it doesn't matter whether you're running a sales team, an ops team, a technology team, an HR function, I may think of it as operations, but it's operations in the broadest context. Lots of these techniques I applied when I was a sales manager. So you get those basics under your belt, and then the team is ready to help the transformation team deliver the broader transformation. You're as fit as you're going to be, so you've got free capacity to go and put people onto secondment so they can get an opportunity to work in project teams. You can make sure you've got enough time to bring people from the project teams into your business so they understand it. And that's what the book's about, is how to make a transformation succeed by focusing on the day-to-day. Because if you get the day-to-day wrong, it doesn't matter how good the transformation, you won't live to see it. Especially in sort of, critical businesses. If you don't sort of make your payments every day in a bank, you don't last very long.
No, I think really well said, and I like the match fit term quite a bit, because as you said, it is all about what you do before the match, and then of course the game plays on, and it will roll. But
Yep.
what you have in control is definitely what you do before, or pre-season, as most sporting teams call it. And it's pretty much there in every sport. And if transformation were a sport, you need to do something pre-season in preparation, and that's
that's right. You think about all those famous Indian batsmen. How much time have they spent in the nets? They have spent hours and hours and hours in the nets, and that's just getting match fit.
And then it comes off when it is needed.
Yep.
Thanks, Nigel. I think I hope the listeners and viewers took some interest in the book as well. And last question, as we wrap this up, fantastic conversation, but it has to end. So last question is that we will definitely wish and hope that everybody listening reads your book. But what is that one book that you would refer, had you not written this book yourself? What is that one book that you would refer to people in transformation, or our kind of field?
So you left your hardest question to last, Anshuman, because I can't answer it. I love books. There was one of the few practical possessions that's really important to me, and I've got like 2,000 books in my sort of library at home. So there isn't one. There's a couple that I will refer to. Most of the books I tend to like from a work perspective are quite technical. They're the technical ones on how to do things, a statistics book or an operations manual about how to do capacity management. I really liked the Checklist Manifesto, Atul Gawande's. I really liked the Toyota Way by Leica, because obviously Toyota was such a major organization at the time. I tend not to read the broad management books. I don't like the sort of the autobiographical. This is how I became really sort of famous and successful type books. There was one book, it's one called The Management Myth by Matthew Stewart, and it was about consulting and how it's a bit of a con in some ways, and I enjoyed that. But what I do really focus on is the human element more of it now. So if I've got my technical books, and then anything that's going to help me understand human dynamics. Now, depending on the nature of the work you're doing, understanding people behavior. There's a book by Mr. Green, Robert Greene, I think it is, called The 48 Rules of Power, and about how people act out and try to gain power in certain situations. And as someone I'm not a very political sort of individual from an organizational perspective. And so that really helped me to see some of the dynamics that were going on at work around how other people who are much more interested in personal projection of power, the techniques and the tools that they were using. And then if I had to bring it down to one book, Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, just because it's so fantastic in terms of every way, shape or form. If you can understand that and all the mystery of Alice in Wonderland, you can make sense of your organization.
Oh, that's I could, we could have a conversation on this last question for an hour or maybe much more, Nigel. I think, and those of who know me, I also totally love books, and nobody at home can touch my bookshelf, and I will. And India, it can get a little dusty, so I would do the cleaning and everything myself. And I totally love that you brought in Checklist Manifesto, because I just couldn't believe that somebody could write that kind of book. And when I picked it up, I thought, how would somebody write a book on a checklist? It is not possible. You could write an article maybe on it, but it is, and I couldn't put it down because it was so true. You
So
can make,
powerful.
yeah, so powerful. You don't need any management method. And I've often told my teams that the best management method ever invented and underrated is the checklist.
Yep,
Your to-do
absolutely right.
list, you come to work every day, make a list, get it done by the end of the day, and go home. So that is usually enough for most jobs. But fantastic conversation, Nigel. Thank you very much, and a lot to learn. We will definitely bring you on for another, longer episode, maybe at some point. And fantastic to hear your war stories and concepts, how you approach the subject of transformation. And now I can see why you have been so successful at this game. So thank you once again. And to our listeners, welcome, Nigel. To our listeners, for this and much more interesting content, you can always subscribe to my channel on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, and the other such whatever tool you use. And the YouTube channel, of course, is always there. Till then, till the next episode, keep managing better. See you later then. Thank you.